Welcome to Spooky Halls. Tonight's episode, I can see ghosts when I'm hammered. This is the creepiest experience I've ever had.
Do I have a drinking problem? Guilty as charged. Am I one of the best paranormal investigators to ever exist? Probably. I still remember the first time I ever encountered a spirit. It was prom night, and the first time I ever got actually drunk. I was thrown up in the girls' restroom when suddenly I could hear sobbing coming from inside another stall. I wiped my mouth and turned to look around. I almost jumped when I saw her, but I quickly caught myself, only allowing a small gasp to escape from my lips. If I hadn't puked it out already, the shock would have sobered me up by then. There in the stall right across from me was a girl. The lid of the toilet was down and she was sitting on it, hanging her head, her long dark hair obscuring her face, but the sounds she was making and the shaking of her shoulders, it was clear to see that she was the one crying. I cleared my throat. "Hi there," I stammered, not quite sure what to say. "I didn't hear you come in. You startled me." I let out a nervous chuckle. No reply. I took a few steps towards her, looking her up and down. It was hard to see in the partial darkness of the room, but she wasn't dressed up for the prom. Her clothes were simple, kind of old-fashioned, 80s style. I was pretty sure I hadn't seen her around before. Are you all right? Is there anything I can help you with? Anything I can do?" I asked gently. Again, no response, just sobs. "Would you like to talk about it?" I offered. It was then that I noticed that something was wrong with the way she was holding her arms. The palms of her hands were pointing upwards, and it looked like she was trying to keep them away from the shirt. I took another step towards her. That's when I saw it, the blood slowly dripping from her hands. She had slit her wrists. "Oh my God! What have you done?" I gasped. We need to get you to the hospital. Come on, get up." I bent down, reached out to grab her shoulder to get her to her feet, but my hand went straight through her. My eyes widened in terror. It couldn't be. I slowly reached out once again to touch her, but again, there was nothing there. It was then that I realized the girl slowly lifted her head, but before I could see her face, she vanished, disappeared into thin air. I stumbled and landed on the cold bathroom floor. It took me a while to completely comprehend the situation. The first thing I did was look her up, and indeed, there had been a student of my high school who had committed suicide in one of the restrooms in 1986. Her name was Pamela. I even found a picture of her. I immediately recognized her. I had seen a ghost. I couldn't believe it at first, but when it all began to sink in, I started conducting some experiments. I visited tons of allegedly haunted locations just to find out if I could see other dead people. But nothing ever happened. Then I tried recreating certain elements of the evening. I tried going back to the school's restroom, but they threw me out. Apparently, former students aren't allowed to come by unannounced. Sometime later, I finally had the idea to try out drinking like I had that night. And what can I say? It worked. I started reorientating my career. If I learned one thing during that time I've been doing this job, it's that most people in the business are fake. A lot of them don't even believe in ghosts. They just use some cheap tricks and make up semi-heartwarming stories to make profit from the mourning loved ones of the recent deceased. I met a few really nice people though too. People who actually want to help. But that's not what this is about. This is about the most horrifying experience I've ever had. It was 2 years ago, and I was still pretty new to the job. I had gotten a call by a middle-aged couple who wanted me to contact their 2 twin daughters who had disappeared 2 months prior. The disappearance had been ruled as a kidnapping case, and investigations were still ongoing. The parents were distraught. They had told me over the phone that they had never really believed in the paranormal, psychics, and all that, but that they were desperate to find their children. I felt terribly sorry for them and immediately got on my way. It took me about 3 hours to get to their place, including the small detour to get booze. I arrived to find a beautiful large house that might have looked like a warm family home if it weren't for the strange, dark atmosphere surrounding the place. The closer I got to the building, the worse it became. The air was cold. Too cold. It all felt so distant and unfamiliar. I remember thinking it was weird. I wasn't even drunk yet. The lady who welcomed me in looked pretty normal, except for the large bags under her eyes and her tear-swollen face. She frowned in confusion as she glanced down at the bottle. "Good evening. Are you the—" "Yes, that's me," I quickly replied. "Oh, come in then," she said in a brittle voice. She led me over into the living room where her husband sat at the large table reading a newspaper. He looked just as beaten as his wife. As he stood up to greet me and shook my hand, I could clearly see that he harbored some doubts about my work. I didn't blame him, though. I guess the bottle of vodka in my hand didn't help me seem very convincing. "Mr. and Mrs. Davis, I'm very sorry about what happened to your daughters. I'm not one to make false promises, but I will try my best to help. Could you tell me a little more about them?" Mr. Davis cleared his throat.
Missy and Lucy. We named them Missy and Lucy. We wanted them to have similar sounding names because...
"They are identical twins," Mrs. Davis chimed in. "They're really clever, good at school. Missy's favorite color is green, and Lucy's is blue. They turned 11 not too long ago. I don't know what to do." Tears began welling up in her eyes. "I just want them back." Her husband leaned over to hug her. Turning back to me, he added,
We don't know if they're still alive. So maybe calling you here is just a waste of time too. The police seem to think so as well. But at this point, we're just desperate for answers. No matter the way, we're open to try anything. So just tell us what we need to do.
I remember frowning slightly at his statement. Why would they tell the police about me? I figured I was overthinking it, and I shrugged it off. "So, this might seem kind of weird to you, but I have a bit of a unique method of working. I already asked you to find a different place to stay for a few hours over the phone, just for that time that I am here. Are you ready to leave then?"
Yes.
Mr. Davis replied. He looked like he wanted to add something, but I interrupted him. "I already know you locked away your valuables. I wasn't planning on stealing anything." The couple exchanged awkward glances, and Mrs. Davis quickly said, "Also, the upstairs bathroom is under renovation. If you need to use the bathroom, please use the one on this floor." "Got it," I replied, placing my bottle on the table. "Oh, and I'm going to need a glass and some orange juice, if you've got some." It didn't take a lot of time for the vodka's effect to set in. I don't hold the strong stuff very well, so it was just a matter of, I don't know, half an hour. Mr. and Mrs. Davis had gone off to see a movie, another thing that struck me as sort of odd. Lord knows that if my kids were missing, I wouldn't be able to focus on anything, let alone a 2-hour film. I figured they probably needed some kind of distraction, though. The last 2 months had probably been hell for them. As the warm feeling began to spread in my stomach, the air around me seemed to grow even heavier. I felt myself becoming susceptible. I leaned back in my chair and waited. There was an air of sorrow, of pain in this room. It was so strong that it felt legitimately oppressive. That there was something else. Rage. An underlying touch of cruelty. I could feel it. I slowly got up from my chair and placed my empty glass on the floor. I hadn't drunken enough for any of my motor skills to be impaired. I walked around the living room trying to determine the center of the strange energy. Suddenly I heard a voice, high-pitched and soft. It was little more than a whisper, but quite clearly the voice of a child, upstairs. I spun around to see the wavering, unclear outline of two girls standing behind me, right next to the living room door. I swallowed down my surprise. So they were dead indeed. But why were they here? Did it mean that the kidnapper had killed them inside the house and then taken away their bodies? "Missy? Lucy?" I asked, trying to suppress the quivering of my own voice. "Needle and thread." They spoke in unison this time, their voices just as fragile as their flickering silhouette. I squinted my eyes. Something about the way they were standing was off. So close, right next to one another. But I just couldn't put my finger on it. Their image was just too faint, like a faded drawing. And suddenly they were gone. "Wait!" I shouted. Then I remembered upstairs. Up the stairs, up the stairs, up the stairs. My mind seemed to scream as I rushed to climb the steps to the second floor. I looked up just in time to catch another glimpse of the twins standing atop of the staircase, staring down at me. Before they vanished out of sight once again. "Lucy! Where are you? Missy!" I yelled out, looking around frantically as I came to a halt in the second floor's hallway. Then I felt it. For just a split second, I could feel the cold lips of one of the dead children right next to my ear. I didn't dare to turn my head in fear of scaring her away. I stood as still as a statue as she whispered two words. "The bathroom." The bathroom. A terrible suspicion began to grow within me. Renovations? Renovations, my ass! I rushed along the hallway, hurriedly checking each room. I passed the parents' room, and a room filled with toys which I assumed had belonged to the twins, and another staircase. There was an additional floor above this one, which was probably where the twins' actual bedrooms were located. But my destination lay at the far end of the hallway. As I ran towards the door, the hallway seemed to stretch itself to a surreal length. The door was locked. Of course it was. The room was under renovations, after all. I kicked it. I banged and threw myself against it until the weak, aged door frame finally gave in. To my surprise, the bathroom looked relatively normal. There was nothing off about it, at first glance. I looked around, searched every corner. Nothing. Absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. "Oh, damn," I muttered. I would have a hard time explaining this to Mr. and Mrs. Davis. But then, there they were again. They were standing in the middle of the room, staring at me with large, pleading eyes. This time I could clearly see what was wrong with them. Their bodies. They were attached at the sides. The rags they were wearing were blood-stained and dirty. It took a few seconds for the realization to set in, and when it did, my blood ran cold. Needle and thread. No. No, no, no. "Please don't tell me that's how you died," I whispered. One of the girls gently tapped the bathroom towel she was standing on with her bare foot. I looked down and my eyes widened. There was a set of towels in the floor that looked much newer than the other ones. They were cleaner and didn't have any scratches yet. The plaster holding them together was fresher too. I took out my pocket knife and hastily began scraping away at it, the twins still standing over me watching. I don't know how long it took me. My knife went dull pretty soon. I found a screwdriver in one of the cabinets and kept it at it until finally, I'd scratched off enough of the towel to be loose enough. Using the blade of my knife as a lever, I lifted the towel. I gagged as I stared into the empty eye sockets of the decomposing head underneath it. The stench that wafted out of the hole was almost worse than the sight itself. I looked up at the sad, watery eyes of the twins. They had sat down in front of me. The girl on the left reached out to touch the remains of the face I had uncovered. "That's me," she breathed. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Who did this to you? I already knew the answer, but I had to hear it from them. "Dad does bad things," the girl on the right said softly. "But Mommy's worse," the girl on the left added. I nodded. I pulled out my cell phone, dialed 911, and upon being asked what my emergency was, I simply said, "I found the two missing girls." After hanging up, I looked back at the girls. They said they're going to be here in 10 minutes. Would you like to tell me what exactly happened? The two girls exchanged pensive glances before the one on the right spoke up. Mommy didn't give us anything to eat. We were hungry. We wanted out. We tried to flee, but they caught us. Mommy was really mad at us. She said we wouldn't go anywhere again, ever. Needle thread. We sat in silence for another 8 minutes or something. I looked at them and they looked back at me. They didn't look all that sad anymore. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a loud knocking at the front door. I got up. "That must be them. Are you girls going to be fine?" I asked as their features began flickering and slowly dissolving in front of my eyes. They didn't respond, and before I knew it, they were gone. I quickly wiped away my tears and rushed downstairs to open the door. It took quite some time to explain everything to the police. I think the official statement says something along the lines of, "The investigator found the corpses by accident." Nonsense. I don't really care, though. They can believe whatever they want. The Davises were arrested pretty much on the spot, and their confessions was just as harrowing as expected. Apparently, Mrs. Davis had some sort of mental illness that caused her to have sudden anger outbursts, and Mr. Davis would gladly let his frustration out on his daughters. When they had given their children nothing to eat for 2 entire days, the girls attempted to run away. They didn't get very far, though. Needle and thread. It's these 3 words that have never left my mind since. This was their cause of death. I don't know how long they survived sewn together, but it couldn't have been long. When they died, their parents hid their corpses under the bathroom tiles and renewed them. The cops hadn't paid attention to them when they had searched the house. Apparently, the Davises wanted to play the role of the grieving parents perfectly, which is why they told everyone that they would be calling a paranormal investigator. They hadn't expected me to find anything. Of course they hadn't. They had looked up the one who, out of everyone in this business, seemed least legitimate. Seeing as I explained my methods on my website, I'm really not surprised they think I was just some crazy weirdo. Well, not everyone believes in ghosts. I don't know what you were expecting when I said I'd tell you about the creepiest thing I ever saw. Probably a demon or something. If so, sorry to disappoint. It's kind of funny though, isn't it? In the end, the worst thing I ever encountered when communicating with the souls of the deceased were 2 very alive humans. As for the twins, I really hope they're doing alright. I have a feeling they're fine.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Spooky Halls. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to check out our other videos and to subscribe. Thank you, and good night.